Hello again, everyone. Let's continue on with A Thousand Boy Kisses by Tillie Cole. Chapter 6 Crowded Hallways and Pierced Hearts. Poppy. You sure you're okay? My mama asked as she stroked my arm. The car rolled to a stop. I smiled and nodded my head. Yeah, mama, I'm good. Her eyes were rimmed with red and tears were building in her eyes. Poppy, baby, you don't have to go to school today if you don't want to. Mama, I love school. I want to be here. I shrugged. Plus, I have history fifth period, and you know how much I love it. It's my favorite class. A reluctant smile pulled on her mouth, and she laughed, wiping her eyes. You're just like your mama, stubborn as an ox, and always seeing the sunshine behind every cloud. I see her personality shine through your eyes every single day. Warmth blossomed in my chest. That makes me real happy, Mama. But I mean it. I'm truly okay, I said sincerely. When Mama's eyes filled with water again, she shooed me from the car, pushing the doctor's note into my hand. Here, make sure to hand that in. I took the paper, but before I shut the car door, I ducked down to say, I love you, Mama, with my whole heart. My Mama paused, and I saw the bittersweet happiness spread on her face. I love you too, Pops, with my whole heart. I shut the door and turned to walk into school. I always thought it was strange arriving at school late. The place was so quiet and still, kind of apocalyptic, the total opposite to the rowdiness of lunch period or the mad dash of students in between classes. I made my way to the school office for Mrs. Greenway, the secretary, to process my doctor's note. As she handed me my hall pass, she asked, How you doing, darling? You keeping that pretty head of yours up? Smiling at her kind face, I replied, Yes, ma'am. She winked at me, making me laugh. That's my girl. Checking my watch, I saw that my next class had only been in session 15 minutes. Moving as quickly as I could to avoid missing anything else, I rushed through the 2 sets of doors until I arrived at my locker. I yanked it open and pulled out the pile of English lit books that I needed for my class. I heard the door at the end of the short hallway opening, but paid it no mind. Once I had everything I needed, I shut my locker door with my elbow and headed for class, wrestling with my many books. When I looked up, I stopped dead. I was sure my heart and my lungs stopped working. Standing about 8 feet in front of me, seemingly as glued to the spot as I was Roon, a towering and fully grown Roon. And he was staring at me, crystal blue eyes held in their trap. I couldn't have turned away even if I had wanted to. Finally, I was able to find a breath and filled my lungs with air. Like a jump lead, the action caused my heart to beat furiously under the stare of this boy, the one that, if I was being honest with myself, I still love more than anything in the world. Roon was dressed as he always had, black muscle t-shirt, black slim fit jeans, and black suede boots. Only now his arms were thicker, his waist was toned and leaner, tapering in at his hips. My eyes traveled to his face and my stomach flipped. I thought I had seen all his beauty as he stood under the lamplight last night, but I hadn't. Older and more mature, he was quite possibly the most beautiful creature I had ever seen. His jaw was strong, perfectly defining his Scandinavian face. His cheekbones were prominent, but not in any way feminine, and a light dusting of blonde stubble graced his chin and cheeks. The constants, I discovered, were those dark blonde eyebrows furrowed over his almond-shaped bright blue eyes. The eyes that even the distance of 4,000 miles and a time scale of 2 years could never erase from my memory. But that gaze, the gaze that was currently boring through mine, didn't belong to the Roon I knew, because it was filled with accusation and hatred. These eyes were glaring at me with unconcealed contempt. I swallowed back the pain that was clawing up my throat, the pain of being on the receiving end of such a hard stare. Being loved by Rune brought the heady sensation of warmth. Being hated by Rune was like standing on an Arctic ice shelf. Minutes passed by and neither of us moved an inch. The air seemed to crackle us around us. I watched as Rune's fist clenched at his side. He seemed to be mentally warring with himself. I wondered what he was fighting inside. The look on his face grew darker still. Then behind him the door opened and William, the hall monitor, walked through. He looked at Rune and me, serving up the excuse I needed to break free from this too intense moment. I needed to gather my thoughts. William cleared his throat. "Can I see your hall pass?" I nodded and, balancing my books on a raised knee, went to hand mine over, but Rune shoved his in front of mine. I didn't react to his blatant rudeness. William checked his pass first. Rune had been picking up his class schedule. That was why he was late. William handed back Rune's pass, but Rune still didn't move. William took hold of mine. He looked at me and said, "I hope you feel better soon, Poppy." My face paled, wondering how he knew, but then I realized the pass had said I'd been to see my doctor. He was simply being kind. He didn't know. "Thank you," I said nervously and risked a look up. Rune was watching me, only this time his forehead appeared lined. I recognized his expression of worry. As soon as Rune saw me staring at him, reading him correctly, the worry was quickly replaced by the scowl he had previously worn. Rune Christiansen was way too handsome to scowl. A face that beautiful should forever wear a smile. "Go on, you two. Get to class." William's hard voice pulled my attention back from Rune. I pushed past them both and rushed out through the bar doors. As soon as I was through to the next hallway, I glanced back onto the fine Rune staring at me through a large pane of glass. My hands began to shake at the intensity of his gaze, but then he suddenly moved away, as if he was forcing himself to leave me alone. It took several seconds to gather some composure. Then I hurried to my class. I was still shaking an hour later. A week passed by, a week of avoiding Rune at all costs. I stayed in my bedroom until I knew he wasn't home. I kept my curtains drawn and my windows locked. Not that Rune would have tried to come in. The few times I had seen him in school, he had either ignored me or glared at me like I was his greatest enemy. Both hurt in equal measure. During lunch periods, I stayed away from the cafeteria. I ate my lunch in the music room and spent the rest of the time practicing my cello. Music was still my safe haven, the one place where I could escape the world. When my bow hit the string, I was transported away on a sea of tones and notes. The pain and grief of the last 2 years disappeared. The loneliness, the tears of anger, all evaporated, leaving a peace I could not find anywhere else. Last week, after my awful hallway reunion with Rune, I needed to get away from it all. I needed to forget the look in his eyes as he glared at me with such hatred. Music was normally my remedy, so I threw myself into intense practice. The only problem? Each time I finished a piece, as soon as the final note faded and I lowered my bow, that devastation cut back through me tenfold. And it stayed. Today, after I finished playing at lunch, the anguish haunted me for the rest of the afternoon. It weighed heavily on my mind as I exited the school building. The courtyard was bustling with students making their way home. I kept my head down and pushed through the crowd, only to turn the corner and see Rune and his friends sitting on the field in the park. Jory and Ruby were there too, and so was Avery. I tried not to stare as Avery sat beside Rune, who was lighting up a cigarette. I tried not to stare as Rune began to smoke, his elbow resting casually on his knee as he leaned back against a tree. And I tried to ignore the flip of my stomach as I hurried by, Rune's narrowed eyes briefly meeting mine. I quickly averted my eyes. Jory jumped to her feet and came running after me. I managed to get far enough from Rune and his friends that they wouldn't hear what Jory had to say to me. "Poppy," she called as she stopped behind me. I turned to face her, feeling Rune's watchful gaze settle on me. I ignored it. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Fine," I replied. Even I heard a slight tremble in my voice. Jory sighed. "Have you spoken to him yet?" "He's been back over a week." My cheeks blazed. I shook my head. "No, I'm not real sure that's a good idea. I drew in a breath and confided. I have no idea what I would say anyhow. He doesn't seem to be the boy I knew and loved for all those years. He seems different. Looks like he's changed. Jory's eyes flared. I know, but I think you're the only girl that sees that as a bad thing, Pops. What do you mean? Jealousy sparked in my chest. Jory pointed to the girls gathering around where he sat, aiming to appear casual, but failing epically in their endeavor. He's all anyone is talking about, and I'm pretty sure any girl in the school, except you, me, and Ruby, would sell their soul to the devil for him to even acknowledge him. He was always wanted, Pops, but well, he had you, and we all knew he wouldn't leave you for anything or anyone. But now, she trailed off, and I could feel my heart deflating. But now he doesn't have me. I finished for her. Now he's free to be with whomever he wants. Jory's eyes widened when she realized she had once again put her foot in her mouth. She squeezed my arm in support, wincing apologetically. I couldn't be mad at her, though. She was always speaking before she thought it through. Besides, everything she said was true. A moment of awkward silence passed until she asked, "What are you up to tomorrow night?" "Nothing," I replied. I was itching to leave. Jory's face lit up. "Good. You can come to Deacon's house party. Can't have you sitting in alone another Saturday night," I laughed. Jory frowned. "Jory, I don't go to parties. No one would invite me anyway." "I'm inviting you. You'll be my date." My humor dropped. "I can't, Jory." I paused. "I can't be there when Ruin is. Not after everything." Jory leaned in closer. "He won't be there," she said quietly. "He's told Deacon he isn't going, that he's going somewhere else." "Where?" I asked, failing to disguise my curiosity. She shrugged. "Hell if I know. Ruin doesn't really talk much. I think it only adds to why he's attracting groupies like there's no tomorrow." Jory stuck out her bottom lip and prodded my arm. "Please, Pops. You've been gone so long, and I've missed you. I want to spend as much time with you as I can, but you keep hiding yourself away. We have years to make up for. Ruby will be there too. You know I'd never leave you alone." My eyes inspected the ground, trying hard to think up an excuse. I looked up at Jory, and I could see that my refusal was upsetting her. Chasing away the pangs of doubt in my chest, I relented. "Okay, I'll come with you." Jory's face split into a huge smile. "Perfect," she said. I laughed as she brought me in for a quick hug. "I need to get home," I said as she released me. "I've got a recital tomorrow. Or tonight, sorry." "Okay, I'll come get you at 7 tomorrow night. Good?" I waved my hand and began walking home. I had only made it a few hundred yards before I felt someone walking behind me through the blossom grove. When I looked over my shoulder, there was Ruin. My heart kicked into sprint mode as my gaze caught his. He didn't look away from me, but I did from him. I was terrified he would try to talk to me. What if he wanted me to explain everything? Or worse, what if he wanted to tell me that what we had was nothing? That would break me. Quickening my pace, I kept my head down and rushed all the way home. I felt him trailing me the entire way, but he made no move to overtake. As I raced up the steps of my porch, I looked to the side and saw him leaning against the side of his house, near his window. My heart flipped as he pushed back his hair. I had to keep my feet rooted to the porch, in case I dropped my bag and ran over to him, to explain why I let him go, why I cut him off so horribly, why I'd give anything for him to kiss me just one more time. Instead, I forced myself to go inside. My mama's words played heavily on my mind as I walked to my bedroom and lay down. "Maybe it was a good thing you broke all contact, baby. I'm not real sure he could have handled everything you went through from what his mama has said." Closing my eyes, I vowed to leave him alone. I wouldn't be a burden to him. I'd protect him from the pain, because I still loved him as much as I always had, even if the boy I loved no longer loved me back. Chapter 7. Lips Betrayed and Painful Truths. Poppy. I flexed one hand, balancing my cello and bow with the other. Every now and again, my fingers grew numb, and I had to wait to be able to play again. But as Michael Brown finished up his violin solo, I knew nothing would deter me from sitting center stage tonight. I would play my piece and I'd savor every second of creating the music I love so much. Michael drew back his bow, and the audience burst into rapturous applause. He took a quick bow and exited onto the other side of the stage. The MC grabbed the mic and announced my name. When the audience heard I was making my long overdue return, their clapping grew louder, welcoming me back to the musical fold. My heart raced in excitement at the whistles and support from parents and friends in the auditorium, as many of my peers from the orchestra came to the wings to pat me on the back and wish me words of encouragement. I had to chase back a lump in my throat. Straightening my shoulders, I forced back the overwhelming onslaught of emotion. I tipped my head to the audience as I walked to take my seat. The spotlight above rained a bright light to me. I positioned myself perfectly, waiting until the clapping died down. As always, I glanced up and found my family sitting proudly in the third row. My mama and daddy were smiling widely. Both sisters gave me little waves, smiling back to show them I had seen them. I fought against the slight pain that fluttered in my chest as I spotted Mr. and Mrs. Christiansen sitting along them, Alton waving at me too. The only person missing was Ruin. I hadn't performed in 2 years, and before that he never missed one of my recitals. Even if he had to travel, he was at every single one. Camera in hand, smiling his crooked half smile when our eyes connected in the dark. Clearing my throat, I closed my eyes as I placed my fingers on the neck of the cello and brought the bow to the string. I counted to 4 in my head and began the challenging prelude from Bach's cello suites. It was one of my favorite pieces to play. The intricacy, of the melody, the fast pace of the bow work, and the perfect tenor sound that echoes through around the auditorium. Each time I sat on this seat, I let the music flow through my veins. I let the melody pour from my heart, and I imagined sitting center stage at Carnegie Hall. My ultimate dream. I imagined the audience sitting before me, people who, like me, lived for the sound of a single perfect note, who thrilled to be carried away on a journey of sound. They felt the music in their hearts and its magic in their souls. My body swayed to the rhythm at the change in tempo and the final crescendo. But best of all, I forgot the numbness in my fingertips. For a brief moment, I forgot it all. As the final note rang in the air, I lifted my bow from the vibrating string and, tipping my head back, slowly opened my eyes. I blinked against the bright light, a smile pulling on my lips in the solace of that silent moment, when the note faded to nothing, before the applause of the audience began, that sweet, sweet moment, when the adrenaline of the music made you feel so alive, you felt you could conquer the world, that you had achieved serenity in its purest form. And then the applause began, breaking the spell. Lowering my head, I smiled as I rose from the seat, bowing my head in thanks. As I gripped the neck of my cello, my eyes automatically searched for my family. Then my eyes traveled along the cheering patrons and skirted along the back wall. At first, I didn't realize what I was seeing, but as my heart slammed against my chest, my eyes were drawn to the very left of the far wall. I caught sight of long blonde hair disappearing through the exit door. A tall, toned boy, dressed all in black, vanishing from sight, but not before he glanced over his shoulder one last time, and I caught a glimpse of his crystal blue eyes. My lips parted in shock, but before I could be sure what I was witnessing, the boy was gone, leaving behind a slowly closing door. Was it? Would he? No, I tried to convince myself firmly. It couldn't have been Ruin. There was no way he would have come to this. He hated me. The memory of his cold blue stare in the school hallway confirmed my thoughts. I was simply wishing for things that couldn't possibly be real. With a final bow, I walked off the stage. I listened to the 3 remaining performers, then left through the backstage door, only to find my family and Rune's family waiting for me. My 13-year-old sister, Savannah, was the first to see me. "Pops!" she shouted, and ran to me, wrapping her arm around my waist. "Hey, y'all," I replied, and squeezed her in my return. The next second, Ida, now 11, was hugging me too. I squeezed them back as tightly as I could. When they drew back, their eyes were shining. I playfully tilted my head. "Hey now, no crying, remember?" Savannah laughed and Ida nodded her head. They released me. My mama and daddy both took their turn in telling me how proud they were. Finally, I turned to Mr. and Mrs. Christiansen. A sudden wave of nerves crashed through me. This would be the first time I had spoken to them since they had returned from Oslo. "Papi," Mrs. Christiansen said softly and held out her arms. I walked to the woman who had been a second mother to me and fell into her embrace. She held me close and kissed my head. "I've missed you, darling," she said, her accent sounding stronger than I remembered. My mind drifted to Rune. I wondered if his accent was stronger too. As Mrs. Christiansen let me go, I chased this idle thought away. Mr. Christiansen hugged me next. When I pulled away, I saw little Alton gripping tightly onto Mr. Christiansen's legs. I bent down. Alton ducked his head down shyly, glimpsing up at me through the thick strand of his long hair. "Hey, baby," I said, tickling his side. "Do you remember me?" Alton stared at me for the longest time before shaking his head. I laughed. "You live right next door to me. Sometimes you would come to the park with me and Rune, or, if it was a good day, to the Blossom Grove." I had spoken Rune's name without conscious thought, but it reminded myself and everyone around me that Rune and I had once been inseparable. A silence descended on the group, feeling an ache in my chest, the kind I got when I fiercely missed my mama. I stood up and glanced away from the sympathetic stares. I was about to change the subject when something pulled on the bottom of my dress. When I looked down, Alton's big blue eyes were fixed on my face. I ran my hand over his soft hair. "Hey, Alton, you okay?" Alton's cheek flushed, but he asked in his sweet voice, "You are friends with Rune?" That same ache from a moment ago flared, and I cast a panicked look around our families. Rune's mama winced. I didn't know what to say. Alton pulled on my dress again, waiting for an answer. Sighing, I kneeled down and said sadly, "He was my very best friend in the whole wide world." I pressed my hand over my chest, and I loved him with my whole heart, every single inch of it. Leaning in closer, I whispered through a thick throat, "And I always will." My stomach flipped. Those words were the very truth from my soul, and no matter how Rune and I were now, I would forever hold him in my heart. "Rune," Alton suddenly spoke up. "Rune spoke to you?" I laughed. "Of course, sweetie. He spoke to me all the time, all of his secrets. We talked about everything." Alton looked back at his daddy, and his little eyebrows drew together, etching a scowl on his cute face. "He spoke to Papi, Papa?" Rune's papa nodded his head. "He did, Alton. Papi was his best friend. He loved her completely." Alton's eyes became impossibly wide, and he turned back to me. His bottom lip trembled. "What's wrong, baby?" I asked, rubbing his arm. Alton sniffed. "Rune doesn't talk to me." My heart sank. Because Rune adored Alton, he had always looked after him, played with him. Alton adored Rune. He admired his big brother so much. "He ignores me," Alton said, his cracked voice breaking my heart. Alton watched me. He watched me with an intensity that I'd only ever experienced from one other person, the older brother who ignored me. He placed his hand on my arm and asked, "Can you speak to him? Can you ask him to speak to me? If you're his best friend, then he'll listen to you." My heart fell to pieces. I looked over Alton's head at his mama and papa, then at mine. They all appeared hurt by Alton's stark revelation. When I turned to Alton again, he was still staring, willing me to help. "I would, sweetie," I said softly, "but he doesn't speak to me now either." I could see Alton's hope deflate like a balloon. I kissed his head, then he ran back to his mama, clearly seeing I was hurting. My daddy quickly changed the subject. He turned to Mr. Christiansen and invited the Christiansen family for drinks at our house tomorrow night. I stepped away from the mall, drawing in a deep breath as my eyes stared blankly across the parking lot. The sound of a car engine revving snapped from my chest. I turned in that direction. I lost all the breath in my lungs when, in the distance, I saw a long-haired, blond boy jump into the front seat of a black Camaro that belonged to Deacon Jacobs, Rune's best friend. I looked in the mirror and admired my outfit. My sky blue skater dress hung to mid-thigh. My bob brown hair was pulled up at the side with a white bow, and I wore black ballet flats on my feet. Reaching for my jewelry box, I pulled out my favorite silver earrings and slipped them into my robes. They were infinity signs. Rune had given them to me for my 14th birthday. I wore them at every opportunity. Grabbing my cropped denim jacket, I hurried out of my bedroom and out into the cool night. Jory had texted me that she was outside. As I climbed into the front seat of her mama's truck, I turned to face my best friend. My best friend was smiling at me. "Poppy, you look so freaking cute," she remarked. I ran my hands down my dress, smoothing out the skirt. "Is it okay?" I asked, worried. I didn't really know what to wear. Jory batted her hand in front of her face as she pulled out of the driveway. "It's fine." I checked out what she was wearing. Jory was dressed in a black sleeveless dress and biker boots. She was definitely edgier than me, but I was thankful that our outfits were not poles apart. "So," she began, as we left my street, "how was the recital?" "Good," I said evasively. Jory glanced at me cautiously. "And how are you feeling?" I rolled my eyes. "Jory, I'm good. Please, just let me be. You're as bad as my mama." Jory seemingly stuck out her tongue, and just like that, she made me laugh again. For the remainder of the ride, Jory filled me in on the gossip that had circled the school about why I'd been gone. I smiled in all the right places and nodded my head at the parts she expected me to, but I wasn't really interested. I never much cared for all the drama that happened at school. I heard the party before I saw it. Shouting and loud music blasted out of Deacon's house and down the street. His parents were on a short vacation, and in the small town of Blossom Grove, that meant one thing: house party. As we parked near the house, we could see kids spilling out onto the front yard. I swallowed back my nerves. I stayed close behind Jory as we crossed the street. Gripping onto her arm, I asked, "Are house parties always this crazy?" Jory laughed. "Yeah." She linked my arm with hers and pulled forward. When we entered the house, I flinched at how loud the music was. As we pushed our way through the rooms to the kitchen, drunken students staggered by, forcing me to grip onto Jory until I was convinced I'd be causing her physical pain. Jory glanced back at me and laughed. When at last we reached the kitchen, I immediately relaxed on seeing Ruby standing with Deacon. The kitchen was much quieter than the room we had struggled through. "Poppy," Ruby declared and crossed the kitchen to pull me into her arms. "Do you want a drink?" "Just a soda," I replied. Ruby frowned. "Poppy," she admonished, "you need a real drink." I laughed at her horrified expression. "Ruby, thanks, but I'll stick to soda." "Boo," Ruby cried, but threw her arm around my neck and led me to the drinks. "Pops," Deacon greeted as a text came through on his cell. "Hey, Deke." I replied and took the diet soda Ruby had poured me. Ruby and Jory led me to the backyard, to the fire pit blazing in the center of the lawn. Surprisingly, not many people were out here, which suited me just fine. It wasn't long before Deacon pulled Ruby back to the party inside, leaving me alone with Jory. I was staring into the flames when Jory said, "I'm sorry about putting my big old foot in my mouth yesterday about Rune. It hurt you. I saw it. Lordy, I just don't always think before I open my big trap." I can relate. My daddy's threatening to have it wired shut. Jory pushed her hands over her mouth in a mock struggle. "I can't, Pops. This mouth, uncontrollable as it is all I've got." Laughing, I shook my head. "It's all right, Jory. I knew you didn't mean it. You'd never hurt me." Jory dropped her hands from her mouth, her head tipped to the side. "Seriously though, Pops, what do you think of Rune? You know, since he's been back." Jory was watching me curiously. I shrugged. Jory rolled her eyes. You're telling me you have no opinion about how the great love of your life looks. Now he's older and, in my opinion, beyond smoking hot. My stomach churned and I played with the plastic solo cup in my hands. Shrugging, I replied, he's just as handsome as he ever was. Joy smirked behind her cup as she took a drink. Then she grimaced when we heard the voice of Avery drifting out from inside the house. Joy lowered her cup. Ugh, looks like the whores in the house. I smiled at the level of disgust on Joy's face. Is she really that bad? I asked. Is she actually a whore? Joy sighed. Not really. I just hate how she flirts with all the guys. Ah, I thought, knowing exactly who she was referring to. Anyone in particular? I teased and watched Joy scowl in response. Judson, perhaps? I added, prompting Joy to throw her empty cup my way. I laughed as it flew past me in completely the wrong direction. When my laughter had died down, Joy said, At least now Rune's back. She seems to have backed out of Judd anyway. My good humor evaporated. When Joy realized what she's just said, she groaned in exasperation at herself and moved quickly to sit beside me and take hold of my hand. Crap, Pops, I'm so sorry. I did it again. I didn't mean... It's okay, I interrupted. But Joy tightened her grip on my hand. Moments of silence passed by. Do you regret it, Pops? Do you ever regret cutting him off like that? I stared at the fire, lost in the roaring flames, and answered honestly. Every single day. Poppy, Joy whispered sadly. I threw her a weak smile. I miss him, Joy. You have no idea how much, but I couldn't tell him what was happening. I couldn't do that to him. Better he believed that I was no longer interested than to tell him the ugly truth. Joy laid her head on my shoulder. I sighed. If he had known, he would have tried everything in his power to come back, but that wouldn't have been possible. His daddy's job was there in Oslo, and I sucked in a breath, and I wanted him to be happy. I knew that in time he'd get past not hearing from me, but I know, Rue and Joy, he would never have gotten past the alternative. Joy lifted her head and kissed my cheek, which made me laugh, but I could still see the sadness on Joy's face as she asked, And now? Now he's back. What will you do? Eventually, everyone else will find out. Inhaling deeply, I replied, I'm hoping they won't, Joy. I'm not popular at school like you, Ruby and Rune. If I simply disappear again, no one will notice. I shook my head, and I doubt the Rune who came home would care anymore. I saw him in the hallway again yesterday, and the look he gave me showed me how he feels. I'm nothing to him now. An awkward silence followed until my best friend ventured, But you love him just as much, am I right? I didn't reply, but my lack of response was as loud as a scream. I did. I still loved him, the same as always. A loud crash came from the front yard, shattering the intensity of our conversation. I realized a couple of hours must have passed since we arrived. Jory got to her feet and grimaced. Pops, I need to pee. Come inside. I laughed at Jory dancing on the spot and followed her inside. Jory pushed her way through to the bathroom at the back of the house. I waited for her in the hallway until I heard Ruby and Deacon's voice drifting from the den. We're going to leave it off there for today. I'll see you again in the next video. Bye.